Hi everyone, I'm Jayden, a senior at Anglo-Chinese School International. Most of us here in this room, I hope, grew up with a kind of safety we never really had to think about. It's the kind of safety of knowing that if something went wrong, someone would ask. That if a teacher saw a bruise, they would notice. That if we needed help, there was a system designed to find us. It is the kind of safety that is so ordinary that most of us don't realize it existed until we are old enough to look back. The architecture that makes that safety possible is child protection. Defined formally, child protection is the prevention of and a response to violence, exploitation, and neglect against children. It is conducted through, number one, laws that codify what a society will and will not tolerate. Second, it is also conducted through ordinary individuals that notice harm being done to children and report those harms. And lastly, through professionals that step in once something has gone horribly wrong. When any part of that system breaks down, the whole structure collapses and child protection fails. That is the problem that I want to talk to you about today, and that is the problem facing our country. Give me a moment. Okay. Yeah, so when it comes to Indonesia, I think the statistics around child protection are incredibly damning. So I'll just give you a couple. Number one, UNICEF estimates that up to 42% of Indonesian children experience abuse in some point in their life. The most common being emotional abuse, according to UNICEF. Number two, according to the International Labour Organization, more than 1 million Indonesian children were engaged in some form of child labor as of 2023. So that's children being pulled out of school, out of educational institutions, and being put into dangerous situations where they're forced to earn their livelihoods. And lastly, according to Safeguarding Children, even in schools, the places where children are supposed to feel the safest, 1 in 5 Indonesian child reports that they have experienced some form of bullying or harassment. That is the scale of the problem, and the question is why. I have two answers to this. Firstly, the first problem is what I call the institutional gap. So when I talk to people about the problems surrounding child protection in Indonesia, a lot of them assume, oh, that must be a problem with a lack of legislation. Indonesia doesn't have enough laws. I don't think that's the case. Indonesia has an abundance of child protection laws. That is not the problem. The quantity of legislation is not the problem. The problem then is that a lot of those laws are extremely outdated, and secondly, they are poorly enforced. This means that often, when it comes to child protection, the degree to which the safety of a child is looked after depends less on what the law says and more on their socio-economic status. To really illustrate how big of a gap this is, let me point to 3 key pieces of child protection legislation in Indonesia. Firstly, Undang-Undang Nomor 20 Tahun 2003 mandates that the government spend at least 20%, so 1 in 5, 20% of the overall state budget towards children's welfare. The reality is that the government only spends 0.1% of the state budget on children's welfare. So that's 1 in 1,000 as opposed to 1 in 5. Secondly, Undang-Undang Nomor 23 Tahun 2006 mandates that every Indonesian child should have access to a free birth certificate. The reality is that 17%, so that's almost 1 in 5 Indonesian children, do not have one, which means that they are precluded from things like enrollment in schools and access to basic governmental resources. But thirdly, Undang-Undang Nomor 35 Tahun 2014 mandates that it is the responsibility of institutions such as schools and local law enforcement to protect the well-being of children. Again, the reality is very different. The reality is that only 1 in every 10,000 cases of child abuse are actually reported. And to put that into perspective, that means that for every child abuse case that is reported to local law enforcement, and again, let me emphasize that this is reported, not actually properly dealt with, it's just reported, 9,999 other cases go unseen. But even if we solved all of this, the problem of child protection in Indonesia, or the lack thereof, is still not solved because there's a second gap. And this second gap is what I call the grassroots gap. This isn't about the law, but it is about the people that the law is supposed to serve. It is about the distance between the systems and the children and families that those systems are supposed to serve. And let me illustrate what this means. So recently, a survey of Indonesian elementary school children found that up to 90% of them did not know could not properly define child abuse. So they're unaware of child abuse means, and this also means that they're unable to identify child abuse when it happens to them or the people around them. But secondly, even if they were able to identify it, the stark reality is that they have no way to tell someone about it. Because the unfortunate reality is that in Indonesia, 5 in 6 abusers are actually family members or people in positions of trust. So they have no one to turn to. The natural person that they can report this form of abuse to is actually the person that they need the most protection from. But lastly, even if they knew all of this, they knew that child abuse is happening, they know what it means, the unfortunate reality is, again, that they have no way of knowing the proper channels through which they can report these instances of abuse. So the hotlines in Indonesia exist, the case officers exist, the websites exist, but what doesn't exist is the ability and the knowledge within children to know and use those tools. And if that is the case, then those tools might as well not exist at all. So this prompted me to start Lex Protects in 2024. So Lex Protects is an entirely youth-run nonprofit organization, and its name is based off of the Latin word for law. So Lex combined with Protects, it's a portmanteau. So it is a reflection of our vision of a more progressive world in which the law actually protects, not just in theory, but also in practice. And Lex Protects started when I was volunteering in a community center near my school, and I was running a public speaking workshop, right? And as I ran this workshop, what I noticed was that actually what these kids need is not to be able to articulate themselves better, although that is useful. It is actually for them to become advocates, for them to have the knowledge to recognize when their rights are being infringed on, and have the tools and the knowledge to use the tools and leverage the tools so that they're able to restore their rights. Just to take you through what Lex Protects does, we have 3 main programs, and I'll run you through each of them. So the first thing that we do under the banner of Lex Protects is a legal advocacy program, because we believe that the institutional gap will not close until there is pressure put on the government to honor the laws that it has already written. Secondly, we also run education and empowerment programs because we believe that the grassroots gap will not close until the children and the families that laws are supposed to serve know how to use those laws for their own protection. And lastly, we also work on fundraising and increasing our resources because we know that all of these programs require funding to operate. So number 1, legal advocacy. So under legal advocacy, Lex Protects does 3 main things. Firstly, we partner with NGOs, non-governmental organizations in Singapore and in Indonesia, such as the Habibie Center, such as Yayasan Cinta Anak Bangsa, YCAB, and Pro Bono Singapore to submit policy recommendations on how the Indonesian government can update its child protection laws. Secondly, we are also frequently invited, and we also speak at public events similar to this one, where we speak directly to, for example, government officials on how we can improve the state of child protection in Indonesia. So that looks like last year we were invited to speak at the 2025 International Human Rights Day Conference, as well as the 2025 anniversary for Sekolah Indonesia Singapura. And lastly, we also conduct independent research and journalism to document stories of child protection in Indonesia. So we document instances in which child protection has succeeded, in which we can learn something from this case, and we also document cases where child protection has unfortunately failed and where we have areas for improvement in those instances. Through that, we hope to raise more public awareness, and we hope to bring more visibility of these problems to the people who actually have power to solve them. But as I said before, right, the law is not enough. So legal advocacy, in my opinion, is not enough. And that brings us to our second program, which is an education and empowerment program. And to be very frank, this is the one that I'm most passionate about because it connects to my passion of debate. So number 1, we run a lot of legal clinics, so legal workshops in schools in underserved communities. And basically what we do is we take this really dense technical child protection legislation and we translate it into plain language that students are able to understand and access. So the goal here is to give a 15 or 14 or 13-year-old the same amount of legal literacy as a corporate lawyer would have when it comes to their own rights. But secondly, we also run things like debate and public speaking workshops in a lot of these schools, because our belief is that debate teaches you a lot of valuable skills like critical thinking and advocacy that allows you to stand up for yourself and also stand up for the people around you when you recognize abuse is happening. So we're educating them on the theory of what child protection is, and we're also empowering them on how they can youth, once they know these laws, how are they able to leverage it through debate and public speaking and speaking up in their communities. But lastly, we also run a lot of fundraising programs because we do recognize that the beneficiaries we work with are often incredibly underprivileged and they need funding, they need extra support in order to survive. And so we do this through three primary ways. The first is through charity debating tournaments. And here on the screen, actually, you can see a poster of the Anglo-Chinese Debating Championship, which we hosted 2 weeks ago, which brought together 45 secondary schools and junior colleges across Singapore, and all of the registration fees that were paid to this charity tournament actually went straight back into Lex Protect's programs, into helping our beneficiaries, into uplifting their standard of living. Secondly, I personally also run paid debate tuition. So I coach kids, for example, in terms of like competitive debate, and all of the proceeds from that also goes back to our beneficiaries. And lastly, we also partner with a lot of our beneficiaries where we resell a lot of the goods, for example, that have been crafted, handmade by children with disabilities or the mothers of those children, so that we're able to economically empower them, so that we can reward them for the productivity and the output that they produce. And I'm incredibly happy to announce that as of right now, we've raised 60 million rupiah for the partners and the people that we work with. The reality is that most children in Indonesia still do not enjoy the same type of safety or the same knowledge of being safe that a lot of us take for granted. What Lex Protects aims to do at its very core is to change that. And we're changing that one step at a time. And we do recognize that this is an incredibly lofty mission that is not easy at all. But what we do know is that these gaps, whether institutional or grassroots, those gaps are closable. And what is needed is contributions through each one of us to close those gaps. So the work starts right here from this room. Before I end my speech, I just want to make two shameless plugs. Actually, no, one shameless plug and one plug that is less shameless. First of all, if you want to follow more of our work, you can find us on Lex Protect, so it's exactly how the organization is spelled on Instagram. But secondly, outside right now, we've also partnered with Yayasan Cinta Anak Bangsa and Jendela Ibu, which is essentially a learning center for children with mental disabilities. And we've partnered with them to help them sell a lot of products that are made by those mothers. And we would really appreciate if you supported us through purchasing those goods, those tote bags and pouches, because it will go straight back into funding the educational programs for children with mental disabilities. Thank you, everyone. And lastly, I just want to thank my mom and dad for always believing in me. Thank you.